Aiden, I'm not joking. If you don't exit this car, I will haul you in there myself, Ivy Holt declared, shooting daggers at her brother through the open window of his sleek black SUV. Aiden leaned his head back against the headrest, emitting a dramatic groan of exasperation. Why must you subject me to this? Ah, blind dates. What a delightful gamble. Are we really acting like we're in our teenage years? At 32, flying solo and living your best life through a screen. What a plot twist. Here I am, in my element, Ivy declared, arms crossed and delivering that classic stern look that had been her secret weapon since childhood. She goes by the name Grace. She's a healthcare superhero. Just waltz right in, have a chat with her, and if she rubs you the wrong way, feel free to declare me the worst matchmaker in history. Ah, but I see you won't, will you? Trust me. Aiden shot a look at the restaurant, its windows glowing softly and making it seem far more welcoming than he was willing to concede. With a jaw so tight it could crack nuts, he let out a dramatic sigh and snatched his keys like they were the last lifeline on a sinking ship. All right then, but this is the final curtain. Of course it is, Ivy replied, a smirk dancing on her lips as she took a step back. Now go dazzle her with that brooding billionaire vibe you've got. Aiden brushed her off and strolled into the restaurant, mentally practicing his best polite banter to survive the evening. Hi, nice to meet you, was a charming opener. A swift sorry, I'm not interested would likely come next. He was guided to a corner table by a host who pointed to a woman sitting with impeccable posture, her hands delicately clasped on the table. She glanced up as he drew near, and for a heartbeat, his stride stumbled. She was beautiful, not in that glitzy, unreachable manner, but in a way that suggested she had wandered in from a realm far more enchanting. Piercing blue eyes, a soft smile, and a serene vibe that knocked him off his game. Yet, there was an elusive quality about her, something that danced just out of reach of his understanding. Hello, she declared, rising to her feet and offering her hand like a seasoned diplomat. I'm Grace. Aiden, he said, shaking her hand like it was a game of rock, paper, scissors. It was warm, soft, and steady, as if she had mastered this art long ago. He sat across from her, suddenly acutely aware of his own lack of readiness for the occasion. So Ivy tells me you're a tech genius, Grace said, her tone playful yet inquisitive. Aiden chuckled softly. Calling it genius might be a stretch. I helm a software company. Let's just say the thrill level is somewhere between watching paint dry and counting sheep. Well, you've already got the upper hand, she replied. I'm just a nurse. Just a nurse. Aiden quirked an eyebrow. I'm convinced that's way cooler than being cooped up in an office all day. She grinned, her smile stretching a bit more, though he noticed a brief glimmer of doubt in her gaze. It was a fleeting moment, barely noticeable, yet undeniably present. He forged ahead, banking on discovering the groove of the chat. So how did Ivy manage to pull you into this? Grace chuckled lightly, her laughter warm and sincere. One of her pals happens to be one of my patients. Oh, look who's the talk of the town. Claimed you were sweet, yet sadly off the market. Well, I thought, why not give it a whirl? Tragically unavailable? Aiden echoed, a sly grin playing on his lips. That's one way to put it. So, is that really the case? She inquired, giving her head a playful tilt. The elusive piece, if you will. He paused. I've been occupied, I suppose. Work has me so occupied, I might just forget what day it is. That's fair. Grace nodded, her gaze unwavering, as if she were peering right through his words. Everyone's got something they're running from. The remark hit like a rogue tennis ball, creating an awkward silence that lingered longer than a bad joke. He cleared his throat, caught in a moment of uncertainty. And what about you? What's your alibi? Me? She said, leaning back slightly. I just don't encounter many folks beyond the office walls. Hospitals aren't exactly the life of the party. Right? Aiden said, and then it dawned on him. Hospitals. Nurses. Her voice. Her aura. It was as if a puzzle piece had finally found its home. His heart did a little jig. the epiphany crashing over him like an enthusiastic wave. "You were there," he blurted out, his voice taking a nosedive. "3 years ago, after my accident, you were my nurse." Grace's smile turned as rigid as a statue, and her grip on the glass of water could probably crush diamonds. "I'm sorry," she replied, her voice as flat as a pancake. Aiden leaned in, his thoughts doing the cha-cha. "Ah, yes, the infamous car crash saga. You were the one who, well, I can't quite put my finger on it, but you swooped in like a superhero and stayed late to lend a hand. I believe you've got it all wrong," Grace interjected, her tone steady yet assertive. "I don't believe we've crossed paths until this evening." Her tone was unwavering, yet her face told a different story, a brief flash of unease, a whisper of unspoken thoughts. Aiden remained skeptical, not even for a heartbeat. "I assure you, my confidence is unwavering," he remarked with a hint of mischief. "I know it was you." Grace's eyes were as steady as a rock, yet her lips remained sealed. The silence hung in the air like an awkward guest who just won't leave, until the server swooped in with their drinks. Aiden mumbled a thank you, his thoughts still tangled up in Grace's orbit. She took a sip of her water, placing the glass down with the precision of a surgeon. "Well," she said at last, her tone taking on a gentler hue, "I can't quite decipher your intentions, but I'm simply here for a meal. Shall we keep it to that?" Aiden scrutinized her, his gut telling him she was playing coy, yet the desperate glimmer in her eyes held him back from probing deeper. "For now, absolutely," he replied, reclining with a hint of mischief. "Dinner it is," Grace nodded, her expression a complete mystery. Yet, as they shifted to more mundane subjects, Aiden couldn't help but feel this was just the beginning of something far more intriguing. Aiden sat in his car, clutching the steering wheel as the night played back in his mind like a never-ending film reel. Grace's serene denial, her perfectly crafted smile, and that little glimmer. Oh, he was convinced it was there. She was definitely in on something. He tightened his jaw, shaking off the pesky thoughts. It wasn't his style to linger on strangers, much less pursue answers to questions that were clearly not on anyone's radar. But this was definitely something. Grace was no ordinary person. She had definitely been through it all, he was convinced. After months of avoidance, Aiden finally decided to crack open the folder on his phone labeled Accident Recovery. The memories within were like an overzealous puppy, eager to leap out and wag its tail, even after 3 years. There were snapshots of his crumpled car, hospital bill summaries that could make anyone weep, and a delightfully blurry selfie his sister Ivy had snapped of him in a wheelchair. He flicked through the collection, pausing on the one image that made his breath catch. A photo of his hospital bracelet lounging on the bedside table like it owned the place. Next to it lay a note, penned in elegant, swirling script. "Stay strong, Aiden. The road ahead is tough, but you're tougher to crack." He recalled gripping that note as if it were a buoy in a sea of chaos. The nurse who penned it was a mystery to him, but deep down, he was certain it was Grace. Suddenly, a knock on his window yanked him back to reality. Ivy was there, peering in, her brow furrowed. "You've been out here for an hour. What's going on?" Aiden rolled down the window, exhaling a frustrated sigh. "It's her." "Who are we talking about?" "The nurse. You know, the one from the hospital post-accident. Grace. She's the one." Ivy tilted her head, mulling over his words. "Are you sure? Perhaps it's just a fancy coincidence." "Absolutely not," Aiden declared with conviction. "I recall her distinctly. She's spinning a tale and the reason eludes me." Ivy let out a low whistle, swung open the passenger door, and slid in. "All right then, let's entertain the idea that you might actually be onto something. What are you going to do about it? Ask her why she won't fess up." "I don't know," Aiden confessed, ruffling his hair. "But I can't just let it slide. She was significant to me back in the day, even if she prefers to play coy about it." Ivy scrutinized him for a beat, then gave a nod. "All right, Sherlock, go ahead and crack the case. But don't go overboard or you'll send her running." The next morning, Aiden found himself in a fog. Every email, every ping, and every chat felt like a cacophony of static. Grace had managed to crack open a door in him, and until he figured out what was behind it, he was stuck in neutral. By lunchtime, he found himself steering his way to the hospital, the very place that had patched him up after the accident. It had been a while since he last graced those sterile halls, but now the scent of disinfectant and the buzz of activity felt like an old friend. He sauntered up to the reception desk, palms slicker than a greased pig. "Hello. I was a patient here a few years back. Any chance I could dig up the names of the staff who were on my case?" The receptionist, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes, frowned. "That's not something we usually share, Mr. Holt. Privacy policies, you understand." Aiden sighed, his shoulders drooping like a deflated balloon. There was this nurse who truly turned my day around. I felt compelled to express my gratitude to her." The receptionist paused, casting a wary eye at her computer screen. "Do you know her name?" she asked. "Grace," he replied in a flash. "Last name?" "No clue." The woman paused her typing, then gave a slight shake of her head. "I'm afraid I'm at a bit of a loss here. Without more specifics, I'm like a nurse without a stethoscope. Most of us only jot down notes when there's a patient in the hot seat of ongoing treatment." Aiden nodded, plastering on a smile that felt more like a grimace. "Well, thanks for nothing." Once back in his car, frustration simmered in his chest like a pot on the verge of boiling over. He simply couldn't let it rest. If the hospital was going to play coy, he'd have to return to the well. He punched in Grace's number. She answered on the third ring. "Aiden?" "Hey," he said, trying to sound as nonchalant as possible. "So, about last night, sorry if I turned things into a circus act. I suppose small talk isn't my forte." "No need to fret," Grace replied with a charming ease. "It was quite the lovely evening. How about a second rendezvous?" He blurted out before his brain could hit the brakes. "Perhaps sans the blind date jitters?" A moment of silence hung in the air like an awkward dance move. "I'm not sure. I swear, no cringe-worthy questions this time," he said, trying to stifle a laugh. "Just coffee, pals." Another pause, followed by a dramatic sigh. "All right then, coffee it is. 1 hour. No grilling." The next afternoon, Aiden found himself at a quaint little cafe, his nerves buzzing like a caffeinated bee in his chest. When Grace strolled in, she sported a straightforward blouse and jeans, her hair neatly tied back in a ponytail. She appeared transformed, less like a fortress and more like an open book, almost inviting. She plopped down across from him, her blue eyes pinning him in place. "Oh, come on, you didn't invite me for coffee just to chat about the weather, did you?" Aiden threw up his hands in playful defeat. "All right, point taken. But I stand by my words. I'm not here to put you on the hot seat. It's just..." He paused, fishing for the perfect phrase. "You strike me as someone I know, and I can't shake that feeling. If I'm off base, just say the word and I'll back off. But if I've hit the nail on the head..." Grace's lips formed a tight line. "Aiden, I'm not entirely convinced about what you believe you recall." "Oh, come on now. It's not me you're spinning a tale," he said with a smirk, leaning in closer. "You left me a note, didn't you? Proclaimed that the road ahead is tough, but you're tougher to shatter." I held on to it. Her eyes popped open for just a heartbeat before she averted her gaze. "Oh dear, I think you've got it all wrong." "Grace, if you would," Aiden interjected, his tone as calm as a cucumber. "Why the denial dance?" She shot up, her chair protesting against the floor. "Because honestly, Aiden, it's ancient history. Let it stay there." And just like that, she made her grand exit, leaving him gaping like a fish out of water, more determined than ever. 2 days crawled by, each hour dragging on as Aiden attempted to bury himself in work, only to fail spectacularly. Grace's words echoed in his thoughts. It's history. Best to leave it where it belongs. But how could he, when the past was the only thing giving him a nudge? By the third day, Aiden found himself back at the hospital, lurking in the parking lot like a hesitant spy. He loathed this sensation, trailing after shadows and invading someone else's story. But he was desperate for answers, even if it meant sacrificing a bit of his pride. When Grace finally strolled out of the building, her hair cascading around her shoulders, she halted in her tracks at the sight of him. The tension was palpable, wrapping around them like a boa constrictor. "Aiden," she said, tiptoeing towards his car. "What brings you to this fine establishment?" "I need to know the truth," he shot back, emerging from the vehicle with all the drama of a soap opera star. "I can't move on until I do," Grace sighed, scanning the parking lot like it held the secret to her freedom. "There's nothing to talk about." "Then why are you dodging it?" Aiden pressed, his tone taking on a life of its own. "Text, oh Grace, how could I forget? And I dare say you haven't quite managed to erase me from your memory either." She crossed her arms, her eyes narrowing like a cat ready to pounce. "What's the point of unearthing this? You made it. You're present. Isn't that sufficient?" "Perhaps it ought to be," Aiden conceded, easing his position. "You were my rock during the stormiest of times, and that truly meant the world to me. It still does, you know." The fortress Grace had constructed around her began to tremble. Her shoulders drooped, and her gaze fell to her shoes. "Oh, Aiden, how could I forget you? Of course, you're unforgettable." Relief flooded him, but it came with a sprinkle of annoyance. "So why the denial?" "Because you're not the same person anymore," Grace said softly, finally locking eyes with him. "And neither am I. I didn't want you to see me as that version of myself. The nurse from your past." "Huh?" "I was aiming for a fresh start." Aiden mulled over her words, peeling back the layers of fear and vulnerability lurking underneath. "You believe that being a chapter in my story somehow lessens your current narrative." She exhaled with a quiver, her poise unraveling. "Each day I play the role of caretaker for others. I mend their wounds, and off they go, like a fleeting thought. They forget. I hoped you wouldn't be just another name in the memory bank, remembered solely for my heroic deeds during your darkest hour." His expression turned mushy. "Grace, you didn't just lend me a hand. You handed me a ticket to optimism. At my rock bottom, you convinced me that a brighter tomorrow was worth the struggle." Grace's eyes sparkled, yet she fought back the tears. "Ah, the responsibilities we bear." "No," Aiden corrected, inching closer with a smirk. "You didn't just stop there. You decided to stick around for an encore. You penned that note, and suddenly I was more than just a patient in your eyes. Now, forgetting you? That's a whole different prescription I can't seem to fill." Silence hung between them, thick with all the things left unspoken. At last, Grace broke the quiet, her voice a mere breath. "I didn't want you to remember me like that. I aimed to be a fresh face in your memory." Aiden's lips curled into a tiny, wry smile. "It seems we don't have the luxury of picking how others recall us." Grace glanced down, her shoulders tensing once more. "What now?" "We start over," Aiden said with a casual shrug. "If that's what you want. Honestly, I don't care if you're the nurse who saved my life or the woman I met on that disastrous blind date. I just want to get to know you." Her eyes danced in his, as if trying to decode the mystery of his sincerity. At last she gave a nod. "All right, let's hit the reset button." They began their rendezvous with regularity. Coffee shops, park benches, and leisurely strolls beneath a canopy of autumn leaves became their new norm. Every meeting unraveled another layer, exposing the individuals behind the labels of nurse and patient. Grace was the epitome of meticulousness, so organized it was almost a superpower, yet her dry wit had a knack for catching Aiden off guard. Aiden, for his part, regaled her with tales of his tech company's wild ascent, his stubborn stance against selling out, and the hollow feeling that success had ultimately bestowed upon him. One evening, as the city's skyline donned its fiery orange attire against the setting sun, Grace decided it was time to unveil a chapter of her life that had been tucked away. "I take care of my younger brother, Liam. He's 16 and has cystic fibrosis. It's the reason I donned the scrubs." The revelation plopped down like a rock in a tranquil pond, sending waves through Aiden's perception of her. "Why didn't you spill the beans?" "Because it adds a twist to the tale," she shot back. "Most folks hear that and bolt, or they dish out sympathy." "I'm not like most folks," Aiden said softly, "and you certainly don't need any sympathy." You absolutely deserve a cheer squad. Grace's usually stoic face cracked just a bit. You believe you've got me all figured out? But trust me, there's a whole saga behind the scenes that you haven't even glimpsed. I want to see all of it, Aiden replied. Even the hard parts. She hesitated, then nodded, a small genuine smile breaking through. Okay, but no more surprises, all right? He chuckled, the sound lifting the mood between them. No promises. But as they chuckled, Aiden felt the ground wobbling beneath them, the past they had nodded to, and the future they were tiptoeing into, each one eyeing the fissures that might send them tumbling. Are you sure this is okay? Grace asked, pulling her jacket snugly around her as she eyed the charmingly rustic mountain cabin. The air was crisp, the autumn chill nipping at the fading sunlight. With a grin, Aiden opened the door and waved her in. It's just a weekend, Grace. No pressure, no expectations, just you, me, and a whole lot of questionable coffee. She smiled just enough to suggest she had a secret, tucking a rebellious strand of hair behind her ear as she stepped inside. The cabin was cozy, the kind of place that felt like it had a personality, even with its minimalist charm. A fire crackled softly in the stone fireplace, and the scent of cedar hung around like an old friend who overstayed their welcome. Aiden made his way to the kitchen, diving into a cabinet like a treasure hunter in search of mugs. Grace strolled around, her fingers dancing along the spines of a well-loved bookshelf. You don't strike me as the cabin type, she quipped, a playful glint in her eye. Aiden shrugged, pouring 2 cups of coffee. Everyone needs a little hideaway now and then, she mused, her fingers dancing over the spine of a book. Is that what this is, a vanishing trick? He handed her a cup, leaning against the counter as he scrutinized her with a curious gaze. Perhaps, but it's also a golden opportunity to hit the refresh button. No clamor, no interruptions, just a moment to ponder what truly counts. Grace nodded thoughtfully, savoring her coffee. It was a delightful contradiction, bitter yet warm, like a cozy blanket made of sarcasm. She hadn't quite grasped how much she craved this kind of comfort. Not too shabby, she conceded, in a rare moment of tranquility. They fell into a groove over the next few hours, trading tales and chuckles as the sun made its dramatic exit behind the horizon. For a fleeting moment, Grace decided to toss aside the heavy backpack of responsibilities, fears, and that daily tightrope act she performed. But just as she began to savor the tranquility, her phone buzzed on the counter like a pesky mosquito. She stole a glance at the screen, and her face went from serene to ghostly in record time. It's Liam. Aiden shot up like a jack-in-the-box, worry etched all over his face. What's the drama? Grace, however, remained tight-lipped, her hands shaking as she picked up the phone. Liam, what's the fuss? Aiden could barely make sense of the frantic chatter on the other end, words racing like they were in a marathon. Grace's breathing picked up speed as she attempted to rein in her brother's spiraling thoughts. All right, focus up, she said with a no-nonsense tone. Please take a seat. Are you puffing on that inhaler? Splendid. Now just focus on breathing, all right? I'm en route. She hung up and snatched her bag, her movements a whirlwind. Time to dash. He's having a flare-up. Aiden was already lunging for his keys. I'll drive, he declared. Nope, she shot back, shaking her head like a bobblehead on a bumpy road. This isn't your circus, Aiden. I've got it covered, she quipped. You don't have to juggle it solo, he shot back, his tone unwavering. Allow me to assist. For a brief moment, she seemed poised to debate, but the pressing nature of the situation took precedence. All right, but we must be quick about it. The drive back to the city was anything but a joyride, with Grace's knuckles resembling freshly bleached laundry as she gripped her phone. Aiden, playing the role of the concerned co-pilot, sneaked glances at her between turns, his thoughts doing the cha-cha. He might not be a cystic fibrosis expert, but it was clear this was no ordinary hiccup in their day. As they reached her apartment, Grace dashed in like she was late for a race. Aiden trailed behind, his eyes landing on Liam, a gangly teen with skin as pale as a ghost and eyes that looked like they'd seen too many late-night movies, slouched on the couch. He was gripping an oxygen mask like it was a lifeline, his breathing a dramatic performance of shallow and uneven notes. "Hey there, pal," Grace chimed in, her voice as gentle as a whisper while she squatted next to him. "I'm here. Let's see what we've got." Liam's eyes darted to Aiden, his brow knitting together in confusion. "Who's that?" Grace threw a glance over her shoulder, her face a perfect mask of mystery. "He's a friend. No need to fret over Aiden." He lingered in the background, feeling like a fish out of water while Grace danced around with her expert finesse. She tweaked Liam's mask, monitored his vitals, and chatted with him in a voice so soothing it could calm a raging storm. As she finally rose, her shoulders sagged in a mix of relief and exhaustion. "He's stabilizing," she murmured. "But I really need to ring his doctor in the morning." Aiden nodded, his worry intensifying. "Is this typical for him?" "It happens," she said, folding her arms. "But it never gets any easier." "Grace," Aiden said with a hint of caution, "why didn't you clue me in on how serious this was?" Her eyes sparked with irritation. "Because it's my life, Aiden. Liam's my little project. I don't need any knights in shining armor trying to save the day." "I'm not looking to fix anything," he stated with a calm demeanor. "I'm just trying to wrap my head around this." She fixed him with a long, contemplative gaze before exhaling slowly. "Liam's been under the weather since forever. I chose the nursing path to look after him, but it's not merely about the medical side of things. It's the whole package, really. His medication, his appointments, the bills." She trailed off, her voice taut. "You're juggling all that solo?" Aiden asked, a blend of astonishment and respect in his tone. "Well, I'm not exactly swimming in options here," she remarked with a hint of resignation. "He's my brother, after all." Aiden inched closer, his eyes locked on hers like a hawk eyeing its prey. "You don't have to tackle this solo." She shook her head, a wry smile playing on her lips. "And what? Allow you to swoop in like a caped crusader? I've taken that detour before. Folks swear they'll stick around, but they vanish when the going gets tough. I'm not one of those," Aiden declared with conviction. "Well, look who's here. Grace, I've arrived just for you and him. What a trio we make. Whatever you fancy." Her expression melted a bit, though the tired sparkle in her eyes remained stubbornly intact. "We'll see." Later that night, once Liam had drifted off to dreamland, Grace plopped down next to Aiden on the couch, looking like she'd just run a marathon. "Thanks for coming back with me," she murmured. "Anytime," he shot back. "And I really mean that." She glanced at him, a silent exchange crackling in the air. For the first time, she dared to entertain the notion that perhaps, just perhaps, she could share the load. Grace's apartment seemed to hold its breath the following morning. The refrigerator buzzed like a distant bee, while Liam's room occasionally coughed up a sound or two. Aiden perched at the kitchen table, cradling a mug of coffee as if it were a long-lost friend. He hadn't planned on an overnight stay, but bolting out the door felt like a plot twist he wasn't ready for, especially after the spectacle he'd just witnessed. Grace strolled in, her hair a delightful chaos in a messy bun, dark circles under her eyes giving her a rather sophisticated look. "I didn't expect you to still be here," she quipped, reaching for a glass of water. "I wasn't going to leave until I knew everything was okay." Aiden shot back, his resolve as strong as ever. She shot him a quick look, a spark of gratitude dancing across her features before she turned her gaze elsewhere. "Liam's on the upswing this morning. Still snoozing, though." Aiden nodded, giving her a scrutinizing look. "So, how often does this little drama unfold?" Grace paused, propping herself against the counter. "The flare-ups? Oh, they like to keep me on my toes. Maybe every few months, but they're as unpredictable as a cat on a hot tin roof. We need to be prepared for whatever comes our way." "So, it's just you looking after him?" Aiden inquired, his tone as flat as a pancake but loaded with unspoken thoughts. She let out a sigh, massaging her temples. "It's always been me, the one stuck with the memories. Our parents checked out when Liam was just 10. He barely recalls them, but I have the whole nostalgic slideshow playing in my head. They may not have been flawless, but their love was undeniable." Once they departed, it was just the two of us left to navigate the aftermath. The gravity of her words hung in the air like an uninvited guest. Aiden paused, picking up on the weight of her words. I've dedicated my whole adult life to ensuring Liam has everything he needs, Grace went on. That's the reason I went into nursing. I was well aware that no one else would keep an eye on him quite like I could. Aiden leaned in a bit. But what about you? Who's got your back? She let out a laugh that was more sour than sweet. Oh, come on. That's not the way the cookie crumbles. As a caregiver, you don't get to indulge in a little self-reflection. That's just not how the game is played, Aiden declared with conviction. You deserve better than this never-ending hustle. Grace shot him a look that could slice through steel. I'm not in the market for sympathy, Aiden. I don't need a knight in shining armor coming to my rescue. It's not pity, he said, his tone as calm as a cucumber. And I'm not here to play the hero. I simply want to lend a hand. Her expression relaxed a bit, yet the tension still clung to her shoulders like an unwelcome guest. I've heard that tune before. People have the best intentions, but when the going gets tough, they seem to vanish into thin air. Not me, though, Aiden stated matter-of-factly. Later that day, Liam emerged from his room like a cozy burrito, swathed in a blanket. His slender build and ghostly complexion were a vivid echo of Grace's late-night revelations to Aiden. Yet, despite his predicament, Liam's bright green eyes sparkled with curiosity as he caught sight of Aiden lounging on the couch. You're still here? Liam asked, his voice hoarse yet laced with a hint of humor. Aiden grinned. Guess I am. How are you feeling? Liam shrugged, flopping onto the recliner like it was a long-lost friend. Better, I suppose, though last night was a total blur, like a magic trick gone wrong. Grace declared it was a disaster. Not exactly a masterpiece, she chimed in while strutting into the room, presenting Liam with a glass of juice. You gave me quite the fright. My bad, Liam mumbled, taking a sip. He then turned to Aiden. So, are you like Grace's boyfriend or something? Grace went still, and Aiden coughed, clearly taken by surprise. Oh no way, he shot back in a flash. We're just pals. Liam flashed a cheeky grin. His clever banter sliced right through the tension. Of course, friends who hang around after a little emergency oxygen therapy. Liam, Grace cautioned, giving him a pointed glance. What? Liam said with a cheeky grin. It's nice. You really don't have many friends, do you? Aiden let out a laugh, and even Grace managed a tiny grin. All right, that's quite enough from you, she remarked, tousling Liam's hair before plopping down. Now drink your juice. In the weeks that followed, Aiden transformed into a subtle yet reliable fixture in their lives. He made surprise grocery runs, shared meals, and even lent a hand to Liam with a school project. Grace, initially wary, maintained a safe distance, but gradually, she found herself lowering her defenses. One evening, as they tidied up after dinner, Grace shot a glance at Aiden. You realize you don't have to keep this up, right? Doing what? He replied, towel in hand, drying a dish with the seriousness of a heart surgeon. Making an entrance, lending a hand, just hanging around. She waved her hand around like a magician without a trick, her voice dripping with doubt. I don't want you to feel obligated. Obligated? Me? Not a chance. Aiden shot back with a grin. I want to be here, he declared. But why? Grace inquired, her tone taking on a gentler note. Why would someone like you, someone with the option to embrace a completely different existence, willingly dive into this delightful mess? He placed the dish down, locking eyes with her. Oh, Grace, it's all about the warm fuzzies, isn't it? I've danced in Liam's shoes, feeling like a heavy backpack on a hike. Trust me, having someone who's not ready to toss you off the cliff makes all the difference. Grace's lips parted just enough to let a hint of hesitation slip through. For a fleeting moment, it looked like she might spill the beans, but then she gave her head a little shake. Oh, if only it were that easy. Perhaps it is, Aiden remarked softly. You simply need to allow it to unfold. That evening, after Aiden had departed, Grace perched on the edge of Liam's bed, tenderly sweeping his hair back while he slumbered. Her heart was a battleground of emotions. A sprinkle of gratitude for Aiden's kindness, a dash of fear about getting too cozy, and a hefty dose of that unyielding love for her brother. She whispered into the stillness, "What if I'm wrong about him?" Liam stirred, his eyes barely cracking open to offer a sleepy reassurance. "You're not, Grace. He's a real piece of work." Grace blinked, taken aback by his words. But as she glanced down at Liam's delicate build, it dawned on her that her fear wasn't solely for her own sake. She was terrified for him. Allowing someone into her world was like juggling flaming swords while riding a unicycle. Risky business. Yet, for the first time in ages, she felt a tiny spark of hope flickering in the shadows. The days morphed into weeks, and Aiden's presence in Grace's and Liam's lives turned into a delightful fixture. He didn't overstep or demand more than Grace was ready to offer, yet his unwavering support was like a catchy tune that refused to leave her head. It stirred her in ways she never saw coming. Relying on someone was as foreign to her as a cat in a dog park, and it sent shivers down her spine. There they were, cozy in her pint-sized living room one evening, while Liam was off dreaming in his room. Aiden had just wrapped up a tale about a work blunder so absurd that it had Grace chuckling, even with her to-do list looming over her. "You should have seen his face," Aiden said with a grin. "The poor fellow was just one typo shy of sending our entire client database a reminder to embrace chaos and live life on the edge." "Well, that's not quite the vibe we were aiming for." Grace shook her head, a playful smirk dancing on her lips. "You should count your blessings that your company is still in one piece." "Not luck," he replied, his tone playful yet earnest. "I've got solid folks in my corner." The remark hit harder than either of them anticipated. Grace's smile took a nosedive as she reached for her mug, peering into the depths of her tea like it held the secrets of the universe. Aiden, ever the perceptive one, leaned in with a curious glint in his eye. "What's brewing in that mind of yours?" he asked. She paused, weighing her words like a tightrope walker on a windy day. "You speak of your team, your crew. How delightful it must be to have a few trusty souls to help shoulder the burden. You could join them, you know," Aiden remarked with a gentle tone. "If you give it a shot." Grace went rigid. "I've given that a whirl before." Aiden scrutinized her, the gravity of her words suspended in the air like an awkward dance partner. What just transpired? For a brief moment, she was silent, her jaw clenching as she grappled with her thoughts. At last, she let out a sigh and placed the mug down. Clearly, there was someone lurking about. Once upon a time, in a land not so far away, David found himself in a moment of profound silence. Aiden, ever the perceptive one, recognized that she had a tale to tell, and it was best delivered on her own stage. "He was fantastic at first," Grace continued, her voice drifting away. "Kind, patient, or so I believed. He claimed he wanted to help, to be my rock and Liam's too. But when the going got tough, when Liam faced his first big hospital drama, poof, he vanished." Aiden frowned. "He actually left?" "He said it was too much," Grace chimed in, her tone dripping with bitterness. "He never signed up for the role of nurse or caretaker. I was under the impression he loved me, but it turns out he was more enamored with the concept of me than the actual package." Aiden felt his chest constrict at her revelation. "I'm sorry." Grace shook her head, her eyes turning steely. "It was a real eye-opener. People love to promise they'll stick around, but let's be honest, most of them vanish like socks in a dryer. So I decided to build a fortress around my heart. It's just simpler that way." "You believe that shutting people out is a shield," Aiden remarked with a soft smile. "But all it's doing is ensuring your solo act continues." Her eyes shot to his, a spark of irritation igniting. "What do you know about it? You've never had to battle for someone else's existence day in and day out." "Touché," he conceded. "I can't claim to know your struggles, but I can certainly relate to the delightful experience of hitting rock bottom and feeling like help is as elusive as a unicorn." Grace's expression softened, her anger melting away like ice cream on a hot day. "I don't want to need anyone, Aiden. It just adds a dash of chaos to the recipe of life." "Needing someone isn't a sign of weakness," he quipped. It's just part of being human. Sure, you might not need me, but I'd like to believe you want me hanging around. She glanced at him, her defenses wobbling just a tad. I'm not sure if I'm up for that. Then we'll just ease into it, Aiden said, a little smirk playing on his lips. No stress, no strings attached. Grace chuckled lightly, shaking her head. You're quite the tenacious one. I like to think of it as being persistently charming, he retorted. The holiday season tiptoed in, bringing a whirlwind of chaos. Grace was like a circus performer, balancing work and Liam's whims, while Aiden played the role of the ever-reliable sidekick. He swooped in with meals when her schedule was tighter than a pair of skinny jeans, helped Liam cram for exams, and even tagged along for the festive adventure of picking out a Christmas tree. As they drew nearer, Grace's anxieties bubbled up like a well-shaken soda. She instinctively hit the brakes, slipping back into her trusty old habits of independence. Aiden caught on, but like a true gentleman, he decided not to nudge her along. Instead, he played the waiting game, giving her the space she needed while silently wishing she'd make the first move. One evening, as they adorned the tree, Liam broke the silence. So, Aiden, are you planning to stick around for Christmas? Grace halted mid-reach for an ornament, her heart doing a little dance. She shot a look at Aiden, eager for his reply. I wasn't planning on it, Aiden said with a hint of caution. But if your sister doesn't give me the boot, I'd be more than willing to. Liam flashed a grin, his slender figure swaying just enough to suggest he might take flight, as he positioned a star at the pinnacle of the tree. You really should. It's been a blast having you here. Grace was ready to unleash a protest, but the sheer delight radiating from Liam's face made her reconsider. She simply couldn't snatch that joy away from him. Fine, she relented. Her tone was a mix of acceptance and warmth. Aiden flashed a smile her way, an unspoken connection lingering in the air. Much appreciated. Later that night, after Liam had drifted off to dreamland, Grace plopped down on the couch, gazing at the twinkling lights on the tree like they were the stars of a very exclusive show. Aiden sauntered in, his warmth wrapping around her like a cozy blanket, but he didn't overstay his welcome. You know, you didn't have to say yes, he remarked after a thoughtful pause, as if he were commenting on the weather rather than a life choice. I know, Grace replied, her voice barely above a whisper. But Liam enjoys your company, and honestly, so do I. Aiden gazed at her, his expression tender. You don't have to tackle this solo, Grace. Well. For the first time, she decided to skip the debate. Instead, she cozied up to him, allowing her worries to take a little vacation, if only for a fleeting moment. The air in the apartment felt like it was auditioning for a role in a drama. Christmas had waltzed in and out, leaving the decorations hanging around like party guests who overstayed their welcome, while the holiday spirit had taken a long vacation. Liam's health had been on a steady course for weeks, but Grace was wise enough to keep her detective hat on, just in case. Every moment of peace felt like a loan from the universe. Aiden was at the kitchen table, furiously tapping away on his laptop, while Grace was busy playing pharmacist with Liam's medications at the counter. It had turned into their little dance. Aiden lost in his digital world, Grace juggling the never-ending to-do list that came with her caregiver cape. Liam's checkup is next week, Grace announced, shattering the silence like a glass dropped on tile. It's just a routine appointment, but you know they'll probably run some labs. His lung function was down last time, so they'll definitely want to keep an eye on that. Aiden nodded, his eyes glued to the screen. Do you want me to tag along? Grace halted, the unexpected question throwing her for a loop. You really don't have to. I know I don't, he replied, glancing upward. But I'd like to if you'd allow me. She paused, her instinct to decline battling with the budding trust she felt. We'll see, Aiden said, frowning as he set his laptop aside. Grace, you realize you don't have to shoulder this all by yourself, right? I'm not doing it alone. She shot back, her tone a bit sharper than she meant. You've been around, haven't you? Being present and actually lending a hand are two entirely different beasts. Aiden countered calmly. You still keep me at a distance, as if you think I'll vanish the moment things get tough. her jaw clenched. Perhaps I am. But can you really fault me for it? No, he conceded, but I'm not David. I'm not about to make a hasty exit. Grace's hands balled into fists, her irritation boiling over. You say that now, but what about when it's not just the occasional flare-up or a few appointments? What do you think happens when it's hospital stays, sleepless nights, and an avalanche of pressure? Do you even have a clue what that feels like? No, I don't, Aiden replied. His voice was as steady as a metronome, but with a firmness that could cut glass. I want to be here for you and for Liam, no matter what, she insisted, shaking her head and turning away. But it's not that simple, Aiden. It is if you let it be, he declared, taking a step closer. But you won't, because you're so accustomed to being the Lone Ranger that you can't even imagine a different route. His words hit home, and Grace whirled around, her eyes practically shooting sparks. You really don't get it, do you? If I start leaning on you and then poof, you're gone. Can you imagine the chaos that would unleash? For me? For Liam? That's a gamble I can't take. Aiden's face softened, his irritation fading into a calm resolve. I see where you're coming from. You're feeling a bit jittery. But, Grace, shoving people away isn't really a shield. It's more like building a cozy little fortress of solitude. And really, it's just not fair to either of us. Grace fixed her gaze on him, her defenses melting like ice cream on a hot day under the heat of his words. But just as she was about to unleash a response, her phone buzzed on the counter, interrupting the moment like an unexpected plot twist. She snatched it up, her heart plummeting as she scanned the screen. It was Liam's doctor. Her voice trembled as she picked up the call. Hello? Yes, it's Grace. Aiden observed her face morph from a tightrope of tension to a full-blown alarm bell. What? No way, he's been just peachy. No major hiccups here. Are you absolutely certain? Her hand clutched the edge of the counter like it was the last lifeboat on the Titanic as the doctor kept on talking. When she finally hung up, her face resembled a ghost, and her eyes were as wide as saucers. What's the scoop? Aiden inquired, inching closer. They got the results from his last labs, she replied, her voice quivering like a leaf in the wind. It seems his lung function has taken a nosedive, more than anyone anticipated. Time to roll out the hospital welcome mat. Today, please. The drive to the hospital was as quiet as a library at midnight, the gravity of the situation hanging over them like a heavy fog. Grace held onto Liam's hand in the back seat, while Aiden's grip on the steering wheel turned his knuckles into a ghostly shade of white. Liam, looking like he just stepped out of a soap opera, attempted to sprinkle some humor into the tense atmosphere. Oh, it's no biggie, Grace, he said with a hint of feigned bravado. I'll just chill at the hospital for a while. I hear their food is top-notch, right? Grace managed a smile, gently pushing his hair back. You'll be just dandy. They merely want to keep tabs on you. Aiden didn't utter a word, but his jaw was as tight as a drum, and his mind was doing the cha-cha. He was aware that Liam's situation was no walk in the park, but witnessing Grace so rattled brought the gravity of it all into sharp focus. He parked the car and assisted Grace in ushering Liam inside, sticking by her side as she maneuvered through the well-trodden path of check-ins and paperwork. Fast forward a few hours, after Liam had been tucked into a room, Grace perched beside his bed, her hands neatly folded in her lap, looking like a statue of concern. Aiden leaned against the wall, observing her with a mix of concern and admiration. The fatigue carved into her features was almost a work of art, and he felt an overwhelming urge to lighten her load. You know, a little beauty sleep wouldn't hurt, he suggested gently. I'm fine, she replied, avoiding his gaze. Oh, really? He quipped, sliding into the seat next to her. You can't keep this up if you're just going to wear yourself out. She finally turned to him, her eyes sparkling with unshed tears. What if I lose him, Aiden? What if I'm not enough? His heart did a little dance at her words. You are more than enough. You've always been the Lone Ranger, but guess what? The cavalry has arrived. For once, Grace decided to skip the debate. She nestled closer, her defenses crumbling like a cookie in milk, as silent tears made their grand exit down her cheeks. Aiden held her, his arms as firm as a bouncer at a club. "I'm here," he whispered, "and I'm not going anywhere." Grace didn't reply, but the way she clung to him spoke volumes, like a silent movie with all the feels. For the first time in ages, she dared to entertain the notion that perhaps, just perhaps, she didn't have to bear the entire universe on her shoulders. The clinical walls of the hospital felt like they were closing in on Grace as hours morphed into days. The steady beeping of machines and the distant buzz of life outside Liam's room provided a relentless soundtrack to her mounting fatigue. Aiden hovered nearby, a silent lighthouse amidst the stormy seas. She had grown accustomed to sailing solo. As the clock ticked into the late evening, the doctor finally waltzed in with news. Grace perked up in her chair, her heart doing a little tap dance in her chest. Aiden, perched next to her, leaned in with a look that was a curious mix of tension and tranquility. The doctor, sporting a smile that could almost be classified as reassuring, declared that his condition is stable for the moment. And guess what? We've kicked off a shiny new treatment plan. It's bold, but it's our golden ticket to boost his lung function. Grace nodded, a wave of relief sweeping over her, though the concern still lingered on her face. Much appreciated. How long will he need to stick around? A week, perhaps more, the doctor chimed in. We'll keep a close eye on him. He's a tough one, Grace. He's got a solid shot. Once the doctor exited, Grace exhaled dramatically, her hands quivering just a tad. Aiden, ever the gentleman, placed his hand over hers in a reassuring gesture. He's going to be okay, he said softly. I hope so, she whispered, her voice cracking like a poorly tuned guitar. I don't know what I'd do if he wasn't. You won't have to face that alone, Aiden declared. No matter what happens. Grace turned to him, her eyes probing his face for any hint of uncertainty. She found none, much to her relief. The next few days zipped by in a whirlwind of pills, check-ins, and sleepless nights. Grace juggled her time between Liam's bedside and power naps in the hospital's family lounge. Aiden, ever the loyal sidekick, stuck by her side through the whole chaotic saga. He brought her coffee, insisted she eat, and somehow managed to elicit a smile from Liam with his dry wit. One evening, as the trio engaged in a riveting game of cards in Liam's room, the teenager glanced at Aiden with a cheeky grin. So you're like officially my sister's boyfriend now, right? Liam, Grace interjected, her tone sharp yet softened by the hint of a smile. What? Liam said, shrugging. He's practically a permanent fixture. That has to mean something, right? Aiden let out a laugh, shooting a glance at Grace. Well, that hinges on your sister, doesn't it? Grace rolled her eyes, yet a newfound warmth danced in her expression. Let's keep our eyes on the prize, shall we? Later that night, once Liam had drifted off to dreamland, Grace and Aiden found themselves in the cozy little waiting area outside his room. The gentle glow of the overhead lights wrapped the space in a warm embrace, creating a sense of security. You're quite the natural with him, Grace remarked, shattering the silence like a well-placed joke. Aiden shrugged, a sly grin dancing on his lips. He really knows how to keep it simple. What a gem of a kid. He is, she said, her voice as soft as a whisper. He's my whole world. I know, Aiden replied. His tone is serious as a cat in a dog park, and that's precisely why I felt the need to chat with you. Grace frowned, sensing the tonal twist that had her on high alert. What's on your mind? Aiden paused, weighing his words like a tightrope walker. I've been mulling over how I might lend a hand. I get it, you're fiercely proud and independent, and I tip my hat to that. But let's be real. The financial weight of all this must feel like an anvil on your shoulders. Grace, however, was already shaking her head, as if she had just spotted a fly in her soup. Aiden, just hear me out, he interjected with a soft tone. I don't want to tread on your toes or make you feel like you're not up to the task. But I have a few tricks up my sleeve to lighten the load for you and Liam. I'm eager to help, not out of obligation, but because I genuinely care about you both. Grace felt a knot in her chest, her instincts battling with the earnestness in his voice. I don't know if I can accept that. No need to rush into a decision, Aiden replied, His tone is steady as a rock. Just ponder this for a moment. You don't have to carry the weight of the world on your shoulders, Grace. Seriously, you shouldn't have to. She averted her gaze, her feelings doing a little dance. One side of her was ready to slam the door shut, determined to guard the delicate equilibrium she had painstakingly crafted. Yet, another side, the softer, more tender version of herself, was whispering that maybe, just maybe, she could open up to someone without completely unraveling. The following morning, as Grace perched by Liam's bedside, he stirred and blinked awake, his voice a raspy tease. "You look like you pulled another all-nighter." Grace grinned, gently sweeping his hair back. "I caught some Z's, kind of." "You really ought to let Aiden pitch in more," Liam remarked, his tone laid back yet sharp. "He's a gem for you." "Oh really?" she inquired, her grin dimming just a tad. "Indeed," Liam remarked, "you seem to carry less tension when he's nearby, and he has a soft spot for you. Maybe it's time to drop the stubborn act and let him in." Grace chuckled lightly, her eyes glistening. "You really are too clever for your own good, aren't you?" Liam offered a faint grin. "Well, someone has to take on the role." That evening, as the sun took its final bow, Grace spotted Aiden in the hospital lounge, gazing out at the twinkling city lights. She plopped down next to him, the silence wrapping around them like a cozy blanket. "I've been mulling over your words," she finally broke the stillness. "And I must say, they've been quite the brain teaser." "And?" he inquired, glancing her way. "I'm not quite sure how to accept help," she confessed. "I've been flying solo for ages now. Trusting that it won't all come crashing down is a tall order." Aiden grasped her hand, his touch as steady as a rock. "It won't. I'm here, Grace, for you and for Liam, and I'm not going anywhere." She glanced at him, her walls crumbling like a cookie in a toddler's hand. "All right," she murmured, "but I need you to channel your inner saint and be patient with me." "I can do that," Aiden said, a small smile dancing on his lips. "We'll figure it out together." For the first time in years, Grace allowed herself to entertain the delightful notion that perhaps, just perhaps, she didn't have to tackle everything solo. As they lounged together, the city lights wrapping them in a cozy embrace, she sensed the tiniest spark of optimism for what lay ahead. It was mid-March, and the lingering chill of winter was still playing hard to get. Liam had made his grand exit from the hospital a few weeks back, and while he was feeling a bit more like a wilted flower than usual, he was holding steady. Grace had finally begun to feel like she could take a breath without the weight of the world on her shoulders. Yet a pesky little unease clung to her like a stubborn shadow. Smooth sailing was a foreign concept, and the silence had her on edge. Aiden, the ever-reliable sidekick, had slipped into their lives as if he had a permanent reservation at their table. He spent his evenings with Liam battling it out in video games, while Grace learned to whip up more than just her go-to-quick meals. For the first time in ages, their apartment had transformed into a cozy nest. But the equilibrium was as fragile as a soap bubble, and Grace couldn't help but second-guess everything. Could she really lean on someone else? Or was she just inviting a sequel to heartbreak for both herself and Liam? One evening, after Liam had hit the hay early, Aiden stumbled upon Grace lounging on the couch, mindlessly flipping through a medical journal as if it held the secrets of the universe. Her shoulders were as tight as a drum, and her gaze was wandering like a lost tourist. "Hey," he said, plopping down next to her. "You've been quieter than a mouse in a cheese shop all day. What's the scoop?" Grace paused, placing the journal down. "I've just been mulling things over." "Mulling over what?" Aiden inquired, his voice soft and inviting. She cast him a glance, her expression a delightful mess of confusion. "About you, about us." Aiden felt a tightening in his chest, but he put on his best poker face. "What about us?" he asked, trying to sound nonchalant. "I'm scared," Grace confessed, her voice barely a whisper. "Everything's great at the moment, but I can't shake the feeling that the other shoe is just lurking around the corner, ready to make a dramatic entrance. I can't say I'm ready for the fallout if this goes south." Aiden took her hand, his grip as reassuring as a cozy blanket. "Grace, I'm not planning on making a hasty exit. I've mentioned that before. But what if it becomes too challenging? she inquired, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears. What if you wake up one day and discover this isn't the life you desire? That's not going to happen, Aiden replied with conviction. I'm fully aware of what I'm getting into. Sure, it won't always be a walk in the park. But hey, nothing truly valuable comes without a bit of a struggle. I'm here because I genuinely want to be Grace. Because I care about you. And because I love you. The words lingered like an awkward guest at a party, leaving Grace momentarily speechless. She had been so busy building her fortress against disappointment that she had completely misplaced the key to feeling loved. I don't know if I deserve that, she said finally, her voice quaking like a leaf in a storm. Oh, you absolutely do, Aiden replied, his gaze as steady as a lighthouse in a tempest. You deserve love, support, and a partner who's ready to weather any storm with you, and guess what? I'm all in for that role. Grace exhaled like a deflating balloon, her defenses finally giving way. I'm not sure I'm ready to return the sentiment just yet. That's perfectly fine, Aiden replied, a gentle smile playing on his lips. I'll wait. The weeks that followed were sprinkled with delightful little moments. Aiden's steadfast patience and ever-present charm coaxed Grace into revealing parts of herself she never knew existed, and gradually, she started to entertain the notion that their relationship might just weather the storms ahead. One fine evening in early April, Aiden whisked Grace and Liam away to a serene park just beyond the city limits. The air was refreshingly crisp yet teasingly warm, with spring's first shy appearances making their debut. They unfurled a picnic blanket by the lake, as the setting sun sprinkled gold and light across the water like a master painter at work. As Liam dashed off to pursue a gaggle of geese, Grace perched next to Aiden, observing him with a blend of mirth and fondness. Look at him, finally regaining some pep, she remarked. He's a trooper, Aiden shot back, just like his sister. Grace smiled, shaking her head. I don't feel like much of a fighter. Well, you are, Aiden replied, and I think it's high time you opened your eyes to that fact. Before Grace could muster a reply, Aiden dove into his pocket and produced a small velvet box. Her breath hitched as he flipped it open to showcase a ring that was both simple and elegant. Aiden, she started, but he swiftly raised a hand to pause her. Before you jump in with both feet, just listen for a sec, he said, his voice steady yet brimming with feeling. This isn't about playing handyman or turning your world upside down. It's about crafting a life side by side. Text, I adore you, Grace, and Liam too. I'm all in for both of you, through the sunshine and the storms. So how about it? Will you tie the knot with me? Grace's eyes widened, her heart doing a little dance. After what felt like an eternity of emotional fortification against the dreaded heartbreak, she found herself gazing at Aiden. There he was, a steadfast soul who had already shown he wasn't about to bolt at the first sign of trouble. With tears threatening to spill over, she nodded, her voice barely a whisper. Yes, I'll marry you. Aiden slid the ring onto her finger, a grin as wide as the horizon lighting up his face. You won't regret this, he said with a twinkle in his eye. Grace chuckled amidst her tears, her heart feeling buoyant for the first time in ages. I certainly don't. From across the field, Liam's voice echoed. What's the scoop over there? Did he finally pop the question? Grace and Aiden both chuckled, beckoning him over. As Liam slid into the mix, the trio settled in, soaking up the sunset over the lake. For the first time, Grace let herself embrace the gravity of the moment. Not a sprinkle of fear or a dash of uncertainty, but a hearty serving of hope. Their lives wouldn't be a walk in the park. Grace was well aware of that. For the first time, she wasn't tackling the challenges solo. As she nestled against Aiden, the warmth of his presence anchoring her, she experienced a sensation that had been MIA for ages. Peace. A year later, the aroma of freshly mowed grass wafted through the air as families congregated around tables at the outdoor school fair. The sun shone warmly on the small crowd, creating an idyllic spring day perfect for laughter, chatter, and the delightful chaos of kids zipping around the booths. Aiden lingered by the lemonade stand, clutching 2 cups, his gaze darting around the fairground like a hawk on the hunt. There you are. Grace's voice cut through the noise as she navigated the crowd with the grace of a gazelle. Her auburn hair shimmered in the sunlight, and that smile of hers? It was enough to make Aiden's heart do a little happy dance. Liam dispatched me on a quest for reinforcements, handing her one of the cups like a knight bestowing a sword. He's holed up at his booth, delivering his grand presentation, yet somehow he's parched beyond belief. Grace let out a chuckle, casting a glance toward Liam's table, where the drama unfolds. Oh, he'll be just dandy. He's been buzzing about the science fair like a bee on caffeine for weeks. And you, Aiden said, his voice taking on a softer note, are officially the most chill I've seen you in ages. I'm making progress, Grace confessed, taking a refreshing sip of the lemonade. It certainly helps that he's in good health at the moment, and that I'm not flying solo in this adventure anymore. She glanced up at him, her smile softening with warmth. You've stuck to your word, Aiden, every last one. He slung an arm around her, planting a kiss on her temple. We're a duo, forever and always. Liam stood at his table, beaming as he shared his project with a small crowd of parents and students. The subject, a prototype for a portable air filtration system, was the result of months of hard work, sparked by his own battles with cystic fibrosis. His energy and enthusiasm were contagious, and Grace couldn't help but notice how much he had blossomed, not just in stature, but in spirit, over the past year. As the crowd scattered, she and Aiden sauntered over, leaving Liam beaming like a cat that just caught a canary. What did you think? He asked, puffing out his chest like a proud peacock. It was brilliant, Aiden replied, giving him a hearty clap on the shoulder. You're about to turn the world upside down with that gadget, kiddo. Grace beamed, her eyes sparkling with pride. You absolutely crushed it, Liam. I'm bursting with pride for you. Liam rolled his eyes, yet his grin stayed put. Thanks, but you lot are making me blush in front of my fans. Aiden chuckled. Fair enough, we'll just hang back and let the star shine. As Liam spun around to charm yet another batch of inquisitive parents, Grace and Aiden sidled off to the sidelines, observing the spectacle. Do you ever ponder how far we've journeyed? Grace mused softly. All the time, Aiden shot back with a grin. It's tough to wrap your head around it. But watching him like this, he paused, shaking his head with a grin. It's everything. Grace nestled closer, her hand finding his. It's been quite the ride, but I wouldn't swap a single moment. Aiden glanced down at her, his eyes brimming with affection. Same here. As the day drew to a close, the trio strolled back to the car, Liam proudly clutching his ribbon for best innovation, a grin plastered on his face. The sun sank lower, splashing the horizon with a delightful palette of orange and pink. Inside the car, while Liam snoozed in the back seat, Grace slyly intertwined her fingers with Aiden's. Thank you, she said softly. For what? For sticking around, for honoring your promises, for being precisely who I needed, even when I was blissfully unaware of my own needs. Aiden lifted her hand to his lips, planting a tender kiss on her knuckles. No need for the gratitude parade, Grace. We're a team, don't forget. Grace beamed, her heart brimming with appreciation and affection. Together, she chimed in. As they rolled into the driveway of their charming abode, Grace glanced back at Liam, blissfully snoozing, and then at Aiden, who was already making his grand exit. In that serene moment, she had an epiphany she'd kept under wraps for ages. They were happy, genuinely, profoundly happy. For the very first time, Grace felt a delightful certainty that this happiness was here to stay.